Did you know there's one mineral essential to longevity? It's magnesium. And not just any magnesium. The most effective form is stabilized magnesium ions. Introducing REMAG by Dr. Carolyn Dean. Experience the benefits of stabilized ionic magnesium and support your health today. Visit RNAreset.com and use offer code MIRACLE10 for 10% off your first order. Visit RNAreset.com and use offer code MIRACLE10 for 10% off your first order.
A common sense recap of the day's biggest stories. It's John Catsimatidis and Rita Cosby. Katz and Cosby on 77 WABC.
Well, joining us now is a former assistant U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York, Andy McCarthy. Andy, what are the rights, first off, of citizens to be safe? I have a whole bunch of layers I want to ask you, but the judge always cites, 18
U.S.C. Section 2, Andy.
See, he says it in his sleep, okay?
Okay.
Aiding and abetting.
Aiding and abetting, right. Yeah, I've heard of that one, Judge.
Anyway, great columns on it too, Andy.
What can be done when you hear this? There's a new thing today, Andy. This Denver mayor has come out, Mayor Mike Johnston, saying don't even think of stepping 1 foot into Denver, and he's equating it like the people fighting against, deportation are like Tiananmen Square. They're freedom fighters. By the way, those people in Tiananmen Square were heroes, and I would think a lot of people in Denver want convicted criminal migrants with serious offenses out of their communities.
Yeah, that's right. And, look, I think Tom Homan was completely right this week when he pointed out that it's a federal felony punishable by, depending on the circumstances, beginning 5 and up to 20 years imprisonment to harbor illegal aliens. So what Homan did was warn the Democratic officials in the sanctuary cities. He wasn't talking about the Denver guy. He was talking about the mayor of Boston. What's her name? Michelle Wu?
Yeah, Michelle Wu. Yep.
Right. So he was saying, look, the law does not require you to help us, but it's a crime to obstruct us. So it's one thing if they don't want to help the federal authorities, but if they do anything to positively interfere with their ability to carry out immigration law, they should be prosecuted, because the law of the land is if the Constitution gives the federal government authority to act in an area, then the Supremacy Clause of the Constitution says the states have to stand down. And they are not allowed. This is federal law, longstanding federal law, which says, among other things, emphatically and unambiguously, that illegal aliens who cross into the United States are supposed to be detained until the conclusion of their removal proceedings. So Biden has done all this stuff, which I just heard your last guest. And it's absolutely correct to say all of this stuff is made up. The app is made up. The parole is made up. That is not the law of the United States. These people are supposed to be detained.
Yeah, great point. Everybody, we're talking to the former assistant U.S. attorney for the Southern District, Andy McCarthy. Andy, we have George Venizelos, who was head of the FBI New York office for many, many years. George.
Hey, Andy, I can't agree with you more. I mean, obstruction of justice is right on the top of the list with that. And besides inciting a potential riot or something like that, by trying to rally these people around to resist arrest. It's a federal law, like you said. It's a federal law. The federal law trumps it. You break a federal law, you break a federal law. Who is the mayor trying to impede an investigation or an arrest? It's bizarre. It really is.
Yeah, George, what would you guys have done back in the day if you get told you're doing a organized crime investigation and you're like, you have to do an operation on a gambling thing or a prostitution thing, and the local police came and said, you guys, the feds, scram, because we're not enforcing those laws here.
Exactly.
How many seconds would it have taken for the FBI to explain the facts of life to them?
How many seconds, George? What would you have done, honestly?
A second. I think, for these politicians to start, being above the law and telling people they're above the law, it's ridiculous. And this is why these cities, are starting to have a lot of problems because of these politicians and these DAs in these big cities.
And by the way, I have one better, you guys. Denver, Tren de Aragua put out a notice it was 2 or 3 weeks ago saying they wanted Denver to be their headquarters for that Venezuelan gang. And Denver's right by Aurora, where they had those apartment buildings with the guys that look like Scarface.
The machine guns.
Yeah.
Well, Rita, they say in Venezuela the skiing is really great.
Well, they may want to go to the slopes to get away from there. I'm telling you. Governor Patterson.
When I sit here and I listen to this, I could close my eyes and go back, say, 60 years to the actions that had to be taken by the federal government to desegregate communities in the South when their leaders were saying exactly the same thing that the mayor of Denver is saying now and that these other people are saying, and they don't realize that they are actually copying the type of conduct in this country that we got rid of years ago, like the line for iambic pentameter, thin partitions do their walls divide.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's so,
whatever that means, that was wonderful.
Yeah, that sounded great. Can you translate for us, Andy, please?
Well, the governor is speaking about something that there's a rich history in the United States of that actually goes back even further than what Governor Patterson is referring to the nullification crisis during the Andrew Jackson administration
Calhoun,
in South Carolina.
Senator Calhoun.
Judge Weinberg.
Andy, I want to turn your attention to actually a very controversial and interesting question. Does the President of the United States and the federal government have the right to use the United States military to remove illegal aliens? I don't think it's a settled question, is it?
But I don't see why. Well, they certainly would have the right because or the power, because the federal Constitution makes the federal government responsible for guaranteeing each state civil peace, and protection from invasion. So implicit in that is if you have a bunch of aliens who are not authorized to be in the United States, whether they present as an actual formal military or not, the federal government has the obligation to protect the states from that. And if it's necessary to call out the armed forces to do that, obviously it's necessary.
Yeah, there was a lower court that said, it's interesting when I was looking at it today, there was a lower courts that said they don't have the right, but better scholars have said it's really an open question. The Supreme Court has never expressly ruled on that. I think you're absolutely right. I think they can use the military force, not just for backup, but to actually use them to remove these people.
Well, I mean,
the whole federal authority over immigration has been implied by courts from the government's sovereignty when it comes to border matters, because President Trump likes to say, if you don't have a border, you don't have a country, right? Well, it's the federal government's obligation to protect the borders, and if border security breaks down, it's the president's obligation to bring to bear whatever force the United States needs to bring to bear to protect that.
I agree with you, Andy.
You know, Governor August said yesterday, Governor
Abbott.
Governor Abbott said yesterday that he's going to use whatever powers he has to make sure the Texas border is sealed.
Yeah. And also he announced he's going to have, 1,400 he's going to have like a square footage.
Acres.
Yeah, acres where he'll use a sort of detention, sort of like a way station.
He's going to use it, give it to the federal government to use.
Yeah, bravo to him.
I mean, Biden is not going to send in troops to oppose the Texas Rangers, are they?
Right. Well, who knows with Biden?
You don't know. You know, look, there was never this tension until the Obama years. It has always been that the states can enforce their laws as long as they're consistent with Congress's laws. And as for that reason, we had no big tension on this issue. But when Obama came in, he said the states were not only bound by federal law, but by administration policy. And therefore, if the administration decided it wasn't going to enforce federal law, the states couldn't do it either. So what Obama was basically saying to these states was, we won't enforce the laws, and you can't enforce the laws. And Justice Scalia pointed out in the Arizona case that if that had been on the table at the time that they were negotiating whether to adopt the Constitution or not, the delegates of the states would have run out of the room and never ratified never adopted the Constitution. Nobody would have went along with that.
Also, I would think at the least you could deputize the military.
I think so.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. But you know what, Andy, what Tom Homan was saying earlier this week was that the military, he thought, would be used more for like infrastructure and like making and maybe like playing a role with this place that like Governor Abbott was talking about, sort of this. Yeah. Is that sort of where you see them playing a role? And look, what is this Denver mayor going to do? He's going to go crazy on anything.
Yeah, but Rita, look, I think some of what we're talking about is like sort of academic legal issues, like what is the extent of the federal power. Mm-hmm. But I think, Tom Homan's an old law enforcement guy, like I'm an old law enforcement guy, like George with you is an old law enforcement guy. We don't like the idea of the military having to get into the enforcement business. Right. And if we can avoid that and have this be a law enforcement issue that you manage with whatever backup you need from the military in the way of support, everybody would prefer that than to see the military, using weapons on our territory. Nobody wants to see that.
Yeah, and also it's no different than in the subways now. You have National Guard down there. What National Guard's quasi-military, right? The military.
Right. Yeah, and that's mainly their
deterrent.
Terrorism effect, right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
All right. Well, Andy, thank you very, very much.
Andy,
thank you.
If you're a maintenance supervisor for a commercial property, you've had to deal with everything from leaky faucets to flickering light bulbs. But nothing's worse than that ancient boiler that's lived in the building since the day it was built, 50 years ago. It's enough to make anyone lose their cool. That's where Grainger comes in. With industrial-grade products and dependable fast delivery, Grainger can help with any challenge. From worn-out components to everyday necessities. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.